Hey all, James from TeaDB here, bringing you another Inbetweenisode. So today I am going to be drinking a tea and going to be talking about a couple different things. I am going to be evaluating a sample from my friend Garrett, who lives locally. He recently moved a little bit further away, but he's still in the greater, I don't know, I guess he's out of the greater Seattle area, but he's still kind of in the Pacific Northwest corridor that he lived in previously. And he made a sample before he moved away of a few different teas. And one of them is a tea that he stored, and I didn't get the exact date when he bought this, so I apologize, but I believe he stored it for at least 4 years, so I think something like 2017 is when he bought it. And this tea, also interestingly, is a Western boutique from 2011, so this tea is now 10 years old. Technically it's a little younger because it's a fall tea, and I'm having this here in spring. But it's still going to be interesting just to think about how Western boutiques have aged, specifically more single origin tea. This is a Gaoshanzhai, so it's a greater Yiwu area tea as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that's developed. These teas at the time did undergo a little bit of controversy just because of some of their processing, of how they might have been processed a little bit red. That means they may have been oxidized a little bit too much. Some people thought they were, other people didn't. I was not in the tea drinking community at the time, so I didn't necessarily have an opinion. I drank this tea 5 or 6 years ago. I liked it. It's not, Tea Urchin is a brand that I've almost come close to buying from a couple times, but I've always usually opted to buying semi-aged tea. And now look at it here. Here this tea is semi-aged. So yeah, Garrett picked this up 5 years ago, so I believe it's stored in Shanghai for something like 5 or 6 years, and now in the Pacific Northwest here. Garrett's storage, very similar to mine. I think it might be just a touch more humid than mine, but overall we're dealing with very, very similar ambient conditions. He lives just very close. There's just going to be a little bit of difference for everyone's storage here and there. So, and I've had this tea a couple times throughout the years. Last time, but usually it's been with Garrett's Brewing, so I'm excited to just sort of have a solo session to absorb this tea and let me know what you guys think. Unlike other times, I actually haven't like pre-rinsed or pre-done this tea at all, so I'm coming in here, fairly blind. All right, so I'm gonna preheat here, and I'm gonna make do just sort of the initial rinse, and I boiled this right before hitting play, so it's still pretty hot. Probably gonna reboil it before the first brew. So giving this a quick rinse. I probably should have poured into here, so here you go. That's what color we're dealing with on the rinse. Take a smell. Still smells quite young, sort of that like acorny. It's definitely not quite as like intensely, floral or green as you would expect from a really young tea. Let's heat this up and do one brew on camera. Okay, so here I am, steep number 1 and 2. Might drink a little more on camera this time because it's an actual evaluation. I do feel, an initial one at least, I feel a little awkward about just having 1 or 2 steeps on camera. So I might try to expose a little more. So you can see that color's still pretty light. It's a yellow, maybe hints of orange coming into it. So pretty, that makes me think that the storage, similar to smell and stuff, is probably on the dry end for sure, which is to be expected. It's more a question of how dry are we talking about. Cheers. Yeah, the body is pretty good on it, honestly. Still tastes pretty young. I don't think I would peg this tea as 10 years old. I'd probably peg it more at like 5 or something. It sort of has a hay-ish type profile. It's not a ton of complexity in this, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe a hint of sort of like grapiness to it as well. First infusions can always be a little misleading as well. I'm going to reboil this, make a couple more on camera. So going to be drinking pretty fast, not something I would recommend at home. It makes sense to take your time and evaluate it a bit more. Aftertaste settling in, pretty good actually. Nice aftertaste, back of the mouth, some decent depth there. Yeah, basically very little bitterness to this. This next infusion is quite nice actually, and it's veering a little bit more to those darker tones. Like darker florals, that sort of thing. You know, another thing I'm also curious about drinking this tea is thinking about blending, and if this is something that I'd rather have if it were blended with other material. Like sometimes I think blending will result in a tea that's greater than the sum of its parts. Is this tea? Does this tea suffer because of that? So far, so good though. I think Iwu teas might be a area of tea where, you know, I'm not that interested in like super singular regions of it, but it might be a sort of tea where at least in this 10 to 15 year range, I'm pretty okay with it being about the level of varying material as this, which is not crazy. Okay. So for me, that's showing up orangish, yellow-orange. So continuing to develop. Interesting. The aroma is really changed a bit. It actually reminds me a little bit now of Gerardo's storage. Sometimes his storage can have this really interesting dry aged floral characteristic to it that you usually don't pick up on a lot of like Asian stored teas. So far the aroma has really changed quite a bit. The first infusion, it was pretty normal, so I'm going to keep paying attention to that. Hint, well, not even a hint. There's definitely like a little bit of a astringent / sour note to the tea. I don't think that's a bad thing. That might actually be a fairly healthy sign that the tea's material is strong enough. So far, I would say this is not awkward. I think it's safely out of that awkward phase where, you know, those, it starts to taste, you start to lose some of those fresh notes, but you haven't developed enough of those age characteristics. That being said, this doesn't taste extremely aged either. So, parameter-wise, using about 5 grams per 75 milliliters here. Brewed a little lighter. Let's see how that is. Interesting. Can't say I love the aroma right now. I've had that sort of aroma come out on a few different US stored teas, and I'm not totally sure if it's specific to the storage or if it's just sort of like a note that comes out on drier storage. I'm kind of leaning towards the latter now, just because I've had it on a few different ones. You might get it on Kunming stored teas, but Kunming stored teas are not something I really seek out or drink often, so my repetitions of that are a bit older. Cheers. Yeah, now that same sort of aroma is coming into it. I think I've heard this described as sort of like a potpourri sort of thing, so just really dried flowers. This infusion's also a little bitter. It brewed the darkest color, so maybe that's not a surprise. So one thing that people will talk about in investigating the sort of redness of a tea is like if the stems are like more oxidized, redder. You can see a little bit of that here. I don't know. For me, this tea tastes pretty normal, so I'm not gonna really dock it many points for that. But I don't know. Your mileage may vary for that. Some people, I think, it can be kind of a polarizing topic, and frankly, I don't have a super strong opinion. As far as the blending on this, I think this is fine. I don't have a huge issue with this. Could this be better if it was blended with different areas and stuff like that to create something more interesting? Perhaps. I think it probably would depend on the skill of the blending. I could see it improving a little bit that way, just because, this is not I'm not going to call this tea simple, but it's not a tea that has a ton of different layers going on, so that could be a way to just sort of bring out different stuff to the forefront, different textures, different notes. So I'm not opposed to blending this material. I mean, obviously you can't at this point, but, just as a general concept. Is this something I would drink? Probably not. I am just generally not a fan of teas stored for this amount of time, this dryly. So I don't think this would pass my personal speed test, and so it would probably not be something that I would seek out. I think the Shanghai storage has clearly been quite dry to it, and I think the storage here has also similarly been fairly dry to it. The storage this is probably most similar to, I would say, is probably like an enhanced Kunming. I don't think this tea is aging super fast in either Garrett storage or the storage in Shanghai. So we're probably looking at, some of the more, in a more aggressive version of Kunming for sure. And so this tea is semi-aged in a way that's pretty different from other semi-aged Iwu teas that you'll have stored in like Taiwan or Malaysia or something like that. And, maybe that's pretty obvious to most people, but I do think it's a distinction worth drawing out too, that it is a tea and the profile is pretty defined by its storage history. Yeah, so sort of acorny, hay. So really, it's a mix of those younger notes, and it's starting to develop that. I do think this tea has a real nice backbone to it, and the aftertaste is good too. So it definitely has some nice stuff going on. Probably not going to give this tea a rating. I just haven't had it enough. I mean, this is 4 infusion, so not going to give it a rating in the same sense that I do rate other teas that I do drink regularly. You know what? Let's give this tea one more brew and see how it does. Okay, so steep number 5 here. Reboiled the water there. Interestingly, this is starting to smell like a couple, some of the more young tea urchin ones. So, sort of like this dark sugar cane scent to it. Kind of a nice aroma. So really quite a changing aroma here, and sort of feels like you're just sort of flying over the history of the tea. Some of these aromas are quite familiar, but it's interesting how fleeting they are. Maybe part of it is also just letting it cool down a little bit as well, bring out different scents to it. But this is not a very constant experience, at least in these first 5 brews. Cheers. Losing a bit of its vibrancy here. This infusion, for the record, for me, is probably one of the easier ones to drink. It's a little bit less sharp, a little softer. Probably at the point where we really started to have to push the tea a little bit more. But this one's pretty pleasant. I'm liking this brew. The aftertaste and the depth at the back of the mouth and maybe even the top of the throat. It's good. It's really not bad, and it's not something that you're going to get in every single tea. So I am really enjoying that aspect to it. For me, the main thing that prevents me from drinking this regularly, or that would prevent me from drinking it regularly, is just a little too green for my own preferences. So I would probably be okay drinking something like this tea if it were exposed to Taiwan storage for about the same amount of time, or Malaysian storage, of course. Or if it just had another 10 years. I'm not sure about that last one because there's just frankly not a lot of 20-year-old Western or drier stored aged teas that I've had that I do that I have really strong reference points as being excellent teas. But I do think this is a good tea, and we'll see how it goes. I don't know how much Garrett has left, so I don't know if it's one that I'll be able to revisit in 5 years and see how it's doing. But yeah, let me know what your all process is if you're engaging in sort of longer term pour storage of just pulling the teas out and evaluating. How often do you do it? What has been your experiences? And how do you sort of peg your storage? I find it personally helpful to sort of look at storage and compare it with what we know of sort of like eastern places of storage, so places that are commonly able to get pu'er from, such as Kunming, obviously on the dry end, Guangzhou, Hong Kong, Taiwan. Does tea that you've tried compare with any of your experiences with tea stored in those places? So would love to hear from y'all. I think it's really helpful for us to share experiences. There's just frankly not a whole lot of reference points out there, so hopefully you all found this interesting as well. And I will see y'all next time.